There's a new catchphrase in Moscow circles that aims to define what it means to be Russian.
Вернем суверенность и независимость нашему культурному коду.
It translates as the Russian Cultural Code. It's a phrase that's left plenty of people scratching their heads.
Not many people in Russia know what it means, actually. I think different people give different definitions.
This elusive idea has crept into every aspect of life.
We see it in entertainment industry, in cinema, in movies, TV shows, music, art, fashion, and definitely social media as well.
This isn't a grassroots movement. The president has made the point of spelling it out again and again.
Создан не только наш общий культурный код, но...
From about 2014, we see Putin saying Russian people, unlike people from elsewhere in the world, they believe in a higher moral purpose. They're less calculated, they're less pragmatic. Their focus is not on themselves, it's on the help to other people. And it's in our cultural and genetic code.
Исключительно мощный генетический код.
The Russian Cultural Code is widely invoked, yet frustratingly vague, and it has gone largely under the radar of Western media. In this episode, we go on a mission to crack it, so we understand how Russians are meant to live by it. I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig, and this is the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring, where we look at the world through the lens of its media, exploring the narratives, the propaganda and the disinformation.
Радио Tehran.
Мы не вторгались на территорию Украины.
Western countries are not the international community. That era has finished.
조중 두당 두 나라 최고 영도자 동지들께서는
The starting point of our journey is not one you'd expect from this show. It's fashion, because what people wear tells a story of its own.
You know, what people wear, it just reflects mood in the society.
Our researcher Yulia Volovik has a long-standing and lively interest in Russian fashion.
I brought this fashion item. This is made by my friend in London who collects Russian folk artifacts.
Folk artifacts, show us.
Okay.
Oh gosh, what is it?
Well, this is a kokoshnik. It's a traditional Russian folk headdress. It sits vertical on your head. I mean, just if you want to have a general idea what it's like, you can look at Mikhail Vrubel's picture, like a swan princess, for example.
And it's like a tiara. It sits quite high up. It's got a fabric at the back, and it's decorated. I imagine,
it could
as you
be
said,
very heavily decorated.
Heavily decorated,
yeah.
According to status and so on. And
it was quite expensive, and in villages it was inherited by generations because you would wear it to social gatherings, and it was just indication of your status. And if you don't have an expensive good one, you have to borrow it.
I grew up reading Russian fairy tales, so Vasilisa Prekrasna would have worn
exactly.
this, yes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, she will. You know, Snegurочка, it's a fairy tale character.
Snow White.
Exactly, it's a Russian response to Snow White.
When the Russian president, who is said to be a history buff, talks not of tanks but of tiaras, it's a signal that symbolism matters.
Приходит в кокошниках, в русских нарядах. Знаете, это не шутка.
He's not the first Russian leader to concern himself with women's dress code and spark a fashion movement in the process.
Kokoshnik, in fact, has been seen as a symbol of Russian identity for a long time. Even Peter the Great, who was promoting everything Western in Russia, he banned kokoshniks from wearing at the court. And Nicholas I in 1833, again by royal decree, he introduced kokoshnik for ladies to wear at the court. Then it was adopted by the higher class.
And now, by presidential approval, the kokoshnik is officially in to become the latest must-wear garment.
They're quite popular. We see it on the streets of Moscow, apparently, and on Instagram as well.
Another fashion-conscious member of our Russia team, Veronika Malinboim, approaches the story with scientific precision.
If you look at the Russian search engine Yandex, We see the average number of searchers for kokoshnik almost doubled between August 2023 and July 2025. We also see over 116,000 posts with kokoshnik hashtag on Instagram.
Покупатели приобрели сотни тысяч кокошников на сотни миллионов рублей.
Apparently, the word kokoshnik comes from an old Slavic word kokoshka, which means hen. The shape resembles the comb on top of a chicken's head. So what are we to read into the return of this eye-catcher?
This idea of the Russian style and the return to everything Russian is becoming more prominent in fashion. So, for example, lapti, which is traditional shoes woven from tree barks, but now they're done in leather with little piercing ornaments. Or kosavorotkas, which is a Russian peasant shirt, usually worn by men. And this is also being modernized to be wearable in the city. Or sarafan, which is a traditional Russian peasant dress. Kokoshniks, of course, but we now see them in leather, in velvet, in muted colors, so they can be worn in everyday looks.
I've seen more stylized version, just very sleek and simple, just a slightly exaggerated headband or tiara. But it's a statement of something, right?
It's a statement of probably national identity. It's a great symbol of Russian culture in a good way, in a bad way as well. If you want to make a bold statement about being Russian, I think kokoshnik is the best symbol of it. Also because now kokoshnik represents what government and Russian authorities want.
And it represents conformity in that way as well.
Absolutely.
Who are the pioneers who set the tone for this new style?
Some government officials, they're trying to incorporate this Russianness into their look. Maria Lvova-Belova, who is Russia's children's rights ombudswoman, wanted by the International Criminal Court for abducting Ukrainian children. She wore a kokoshnik to meet Putin.
Поэтому, Владимир Владимирович, инспекция сейчас прошла. Да, регионы начали что-то внедрять.
State Duma deputy Ksenia Goryacheva, who actually sometimes voices a little bit liberal takes for the modern day in Russia, but she wears kokoshniks to Duma.
Когда ты открываешь рот и говоришь по существу, или не подписываешься под какое-то мракобесие.
We see some military elements. For example, Anna Savilova, who is a deputy defense minister, and no surprise there. I remember her wearing various different costumes that incorporated military symbols.
The deputy defense minister was visiting wounded soldiers in a military hospital in the clip you heard. After all, Russia is a country at war, one that has taken countless Russian and Ukrainian lives. So no surprises there, as Veronica points out, that these rustic elements are fused with military flair to create a patriotic capsule collection. The kokoshnik's debut on the world stage wasn't a catwalk moment. It photobombed the world's favorite sporting tournament.
Kokoshnik became hugely popular in 2018 during the Football World Cup that was held in Russia, when female fans were wearing them at the matches.
One story that stuck with me from the 2018 World Cup in Russia was an MP warning Russian women not to sleep with foreign visitors. A striking example of the patriotic vibe that's now stitched into the fashion narrative.
Actually, kokoshnik started appearing in designers' collection in 2011. That's before the annexation of Crimea. Brands like Patriotka, which means patriot, promote them on social media.
Бренда Patriotka и создательница современного кокошника.
Ladies wear them to State Duma, and Putin praises young ladies for wearing them. So it is obviously it's very popular, and it became a symbol of so-called Russian code. I call it patriotic wave. Alena Akhmadulina's collection was the first bold statement of kokoshnik. She made them from fur, and imagine like a huge fur collar standing vertically on someone's head.
Quite a statement.
Quite.
Why do we see a return to the past now?
One of very famous modern fashion historians, he thinks that patriotic moods, patriotic thinking rises before big wars. And he draws parallels with the beginning of 20th century. Before the start of the First World War, people started wearing a lot of this kokoshnik, like sleeveless fur-trimmed vests and embroidered shirts.
Это не какая-то одежда, это код нашей мысли.
I believe Russian authorities need some buzz phrases to promote Russianness and Russian tradition to justify the war.
So it's all to do with the war. This kind of nurturing a patriotic feeling by resurrecting old symbols and old garments.
It's a very philosophical question. It's about arguing what comes first. There is some genuine interest to folk tradition and history and culture going separately from the war. There was something that was happening naturally. It wasn't necessarily only promoted by state, I would say. I think that's something that coincides and goes parallel with the patriotic wave, which started after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it could be traced not only in fashion, but in films and in music, for example. I grew up in the Soviet Union. Any folk art and folk traditions were reaching masses in a very diluted and caricature form. So it caused strong rejection in my generation. So it could be just overcompensation for people who completely forgot about their ethnic roots, and they started to rediscover them.
The kokoshnik seems to have become a poster image for something bigger, the Russian cultural code. It's the thread running through fashion, music and books. But what does it actually mean?
Что является культурным кодом? С какой точки?
Внутренним культурным кодом. Но сейчас...
В этом году культурный код начался в Московской области.
По культурному коду.
Not many people in Russia know what it means, actually. Different people described it as Russia's cultural heritage, traditions, mentality, shared values, or just general norms of behavior and upbringing. It's what a certain sign, word, phrase, or gesture or symbol would mean.
When identity gets appropriated by those at the top, it gets an ideological twist.
For Russian authorities, however, and Putin in particular, it's beyond cultural heritage, beyond context, or even shared history. It almost gets an existential weight to it, because for Putin, it's about how Russians are distinct from and also superior to the West.
Наш генный код почти наверняка является одним из главных наших...
In 2012, Putin was talking about the preservation of civilizational identity, which, according to him, rests on preserving the Russian cultural dominance, about how this cultural code is coming under serious attack from the West.
Не мечтали на Западе. Об этом заявил Владимир Путин.
Цель этого Запада ослабить, разобщить.
It's not us doing something wrong. It's just the whole world is trying to destroy us. And all of that really plays into this idea of the preservation of the foundation of the Russian statehood. He also mentioned that the ongoing war on Ukraine was a path to cleansing and renewal. So everything is so existential and so grand. And I think it's deliberately made so to attach a lot of purpose to what's going on right now.
Мы менее прагматичны, менее расчетливы.
In his national development strategy for 2012-2025, he's talking about some fundamental principles which combine and unite the distinctive traditions of all the different ethnic minorities that reside in Russia and how they need to be preserved into a single Russian culture. Putin begins to almost, I want to say deliberately, confuse the cultural code with the genetic code of the Russian people. In 2014, he's saying Russian people, unlike people from elsewhere in the world, they believe in a higher moral purpose. They're less calculated. Their focus is not on themselves, it's on the help to other people. And it's in our cultural and genetic code.
Не только наш общий культурный код, но и исключительно мощный генетический код.
It's almost like a deliberate way of showing how deeply rooted this concept is. It's in the genes, you're born with it. Nuclear families, very traditional and conservative understandings of gender roles, and rejection of any external pressure.
You are listening to the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. Let's look into gender roles. What kind of a woman should the Russian woman be, according to Putin?
Настоящей душой большой многодетной семьи.
He was meeting with female entrepreneurs, talking about how women take on many different roles. However, thank God, in Russia, we do not mix the notion of a woman being a woman and a man being a man. He was talking about how respect for parents, country, region, elders, and motherland is also a part of Russia's stability. All these meanings that Putin assigns to the concept of the cultural code combined with very heavy state censorship and state propaganda, it definitely serves as a way to unite the whole of Russia, especially at times of war and international isolation.
The president gave the pitch for others around him to pick up the tune.
Это касается и воспитания детей, формирования у них правильных нравственных ориентиров.
Valentina Matviyenko, head of the upper chamber of the Russian parliament, she was talking about the cultural code in terms of education of the children, how the future of Russia as a great power depends on it. Sergei Lavrov was also using this concept to add value to the concept of the multipolar world, where the West is no longer a hegemon.
Западные страны прибегают к прямому шантажу, давлению.
And he was saying how the various cultural codes are now shaping this new world order. We see it in entertainment industry, in cinema, in movies, TV shows, music, art, fashion, and definitely social media as well.
Enter the digital foot soldiers, those entrusted with carrying the baton of the Russian cultural code.
Русском стиле в одежде. Русский стиль в одежде в тех или иных проявлениях.
It could be your fashion influencer, blogger promoting Russian brands, or it could be a travel blogger who is showing you the beauties and the benefits of the domestic travel.
И рвануть на Алтай. Золоченые горы, прохлада местных озер.
Especially since it's quite problematic for Russians to travel to the Western countries nowadays because of the sanctions and the war. Or it could be your ultra-patriotic bloggers whose content is basically centered around edits of Putin or Lavrov, or footage of military parades.
Ты модник, а то и видно. Да благословит тебя Господь.
Orthodox priests are also emerging as a new sort of subgroup of Russian bloggers promoting traditional values, because the Russian Orthodox Church is also realizing the potential of social media and is definitely investing in that, but in a very fun and youth-friendly way.
Боимся быть женственными. Меня зовут Екатерина, я жена православного священника.
You see the wives of priests, which is a very interesting subgroup, I think, who are sort of mixing fashion influencer posts with religious teachings. So you will get like 5 looks to wear to church this autumn, for example.
Sounds like the equivalent of the footballer's wife phenomenon.
It definitely resembles that to some degree.
What's in it for these influencers in Russia? What are they getting for what they're doing?
Not all of them are immediately sponsored by the government or receive some sort of state funds. For example, one semi-famous fashion blogger was invited to the Russian parliament to a roundtable discussion about the promotion of a Russian cultural code in the blogosphere. The Council of Bloggers was founded in 2020, and it openly declares its cooperation with Parliament. A lot of them have over 1 million subscribers. They promote to various degrees Russian narratives and Russian propaganda and collect aid for soldiers at the front line in fighting in Ukraine. There is still some evidence of Russian government trying to create the next generation of such bloggers via various educational events, competitions. You get some blogger boot camps where they teach them how to promote traditional values.
Семья — это главный аспект, без которого человека нельзя считать счастливым.
In 2024, there was an initiative to create a registry of bloggers who promote traditional and patriotic values.
Сюда можно включить и блогеров, которые ведут патриотическую повестку для нас.
Support from the state comes with strings attached. Bloggers who prefer to remain free-range could be hit in the pocket.
It's very important to remember that if you are a blogger on Telegram, which is one of Russia's most popular social media platforms, and your following is over 10,000 people, you are obliged to register with Roskomnadzor, which is a state watchdog. And if you don't get this registration and verification, you're then not allowed to accept donations from your followers or advertise. And advertisers, in turn, told to check the registry and the content compliance, while state officials are also urging bloggers to promote Russian culture at home and abroad. If you're a blogger, the least you should be doing if you want to remain in Russia is not to anger the authorities. So there is a degree of self-censorship. But if you want state support, then you should probably think about cooperating with the government, or you have to be neutral at the very least.
What role does traditional fashion media play in shaping these values? Or has it too become a tool of the state?
It's interesting because the sort of glam that came to replace the fashion magazines that departed Russia after the invasion is not as obviously propagandistic as you would imagine. So the main one is called Moskvichka, Muscovite, and it self-identifies as a post-sanctions glam.
О чем бы вы хотели прочитать в журнале «Москвичка»?
And it definitely idealizes the life in the new reality. It praises new domestic tourist destinations, glorifies life in Russia. During their presentation, they had girls dancing in kokoshniks, but they don't necessarily directly talk about women's roles or promoting those very obvious values. And it also has really fun little side projects.
Солнцу, свету и луне мы летим в одной трубе.
There's Moskvich, which is a male version of Moskvichka, of the same magazine, so basically like a Russian GQ.
The Russian cultural code has rippled through many other areas and now echoes through music, films, entertainment, and the rhythm of daily life.
In terms of cinema and culture, we see that Russia plans to allocate over 460 million rubles annually to support the production of domestic films aimed at promoting spiritual and moral values.
Это соревнования по популяризации местных брендов.
Then we see Знай наших, Know Ours contest. And that is aimed at supporting domestic brands, especially since the departure of Western brands from Russia.
«Знай наших» собирает участников уже во второй раз.
And within that competition, in 2025, they established a separate category called Cultural Code to sort of empower and support brands that incorporate this idea of a cultural code into whatever products or services they offer. We see government supporting patriotic video games, or we see State Duma proposing bans on advertisement of imported children's toys because they say that they promote alien cultural values.
Правильные игрушки, которые действительно воспитывают наших традиций.
I think it's really, really all-encompassing. And I think that's just the beginning. And I would expect that the further we go, the more measures like that we'll see.
We've seen this before. Soviet leaders understood the power of culture as a weapon in the ideological fight. So they censored it heavily, filtering out anything deemed undesirable.
And of course, when we talk about the parallels between the modern-day Russia and the USSR, it's very important to mention censorship. In the USSR, censorship was handled by Glaflit, a body that would issue permissions to publish. And Goskino, in turn, would approve scripts and films.
Коммунистическая партия рассматривает киноискусство как важный фактор.
And then we also had unions of writers, artists, and composers, which acted as ideological filters. And if you were not a part of this union, you were effectively denied access to publication or exhibition.
This reminds me of Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. His satire of the writers' union Masulit begins with the tragic fate of its head Berlioz, courtesy of spilled sunflower oil and a tram. It's a darkly comic jab at writers who follow state orders.
Why? Because Anna has already bought the sunflower seed oil.
The current state of affairs feels like déjà vu.
We already see expert councils that decide whether a creator is going to receive a grant or a license. And then the Ministry of Culture will refuse distribution of certificates to films if they, for example, distort historical truth or promote non-traditional values.
нет реагирования, то там 300-500 тысяч штрафов.
And Russian Book Union has already warned shops of increased risks of fines for selling such books written by the so-called foreign agents, which led to the removal of them from sale. We also see that artists who are speaking out against war, they have their concerts cancelled. Sometimes they face criminal charges, and they're often forced to just leave Russia, really.
There is a heavy price to pay for crossing the line, as two female creators found out recently. Zhenya Berkovich and Svetlana Petrichuk were jailed for 6 years over their critically acclaimed theatre production, Finished the Bright Falcon.
So what does that mean? That I'm going to prison, merely for intent?
But what did you expect? Intentions are far more serious than actions. Actions only hurt people, whereas intentions hurt our entire mythology.
The legal case against them was described as the first of its kind since the Soviet era, where artists were prosecuted for the ideas in their work, even though some of the actors wore kokoshniks throughout the play. So what is allowed?
What is allowed? Whatever Putin says is good. Love for the motherland, the deep respect for your traditional values and traditions, and preservation of historic memory, which also means whatever Putin wants you to remember, which is not necessarily related to reality.
It seems that these ideas do find purchase among Russians. It's hard to say to what extent, because there is not enough reliable data.
Just by looking at the Russian search engine Yandex, I would say that there is a growing interest in Russian-style brands. It's safe to say that there is some degree of interest to Russian-ness among the Russian youth. I think the funniest trend that is associated with it to me is the sudden popularity of a largely forgotten pop folk singer, Nadezhda Kadышeva. Her concerts were attended by people who like the traditional Russian songs and dancing. And all of a sudden, young people began recording videos to her songs on TikTok. And then this post-irony kind of spiraled out of control. And she's actually booking much larger concert venues across Russia just to accommodate her fan base.
The idea of Russia First, driven partially by sanctions, has found another outlet for creative expression: vacations.
Domestic trends are growing. The most interesting one is probably monasteering. It's when young people choose to spend their vacation in a monastery, doing physical labor and basically following the strict regime of the monks or nuns. They pray and they stay silent and thereby somehow reduce their anxiety. That's what they are saying, and escape from the rush of big city.
It sounds like a Buddhist retreat, but with an Orthodox theme.
It is exactly that. I've seen some celebrities visiting, so this is definitely another interesting trend that is emerging amid the isolation of Russia.
Back to the past. The fairy tales I read as a child always began with long time ago, perhaps to create a separate moral pain of the past meant to guide and inspire today. Nostalgia, from folk traditions to Soviet memories, has become a compass in the search for Russian greatness.
I personally see a surge in some nostalgia for the USSR. There is a new sort of mini trend on Soviet chic. I don't think there is a deep understanding of what the life was like. There is a nostalgia for this romanticized, polished look of what the Soviet era in Russia would be like. Not a genuine desire to read Marx or to visit Lenin's mausoleum at the Red Square.
Rustic charm, Soviet chic, post-sanctions glam are all supposed to be the hallmarks of Russian greatness. The main author of the concept belongs to a generation of Stirlitz fans. Stirlitz, for those who don't know, was a fictional Soviet agent in Nazi Germany, a Soviet James Bond, if you like, who had one thing on his mind: the motherland, and no time for women and cocktails.
Мы выполняли приказ. Мы такие же солдаты, как и вы, солдаты фюрера.
President Putin spoke fondly of the special people who leave the homeland for dangerous missions.
Это люди особые, особых убеждений и особого склада характера.
It's no wonder that his understanding of the Russian cultural code is built on the era that shaped him.
The USSR sought to build a classless society and promoted collective over the individual. It was said that culture belonged to the people, but in reality, it was a tool of a state. And the chief function of music, theater, literature there was to shape the Soviet person and promote the communist values and patriotism. And in Russia today, the understanding of culture in that sense has in many ways returned. The only difference, in my opinion, is that the communist values have been replaced by traditional values.
А также приостановке прокатов тех картин, которые нарушают наши традиционные ценности.
We see that culture serves the state goals of forming civic identity, educating citizens, and strengthening the unity of Russian society. The state cultural policy, which was approved in 2014, mentions things like preservation and transmission of traditional values and resistance to the global advance of pseudo-culture. A Kremlin term for the globalist Western culture that is trying to destroy the Russian identity. And we see the forming of the image of the Russian state as the custodian and defender of traditional universal spiritual and moral values on the international stage. Culture is regarded, I think, as a means of constructing the citizens' mindset, which values they should share. And also, once again, culture is a weapon in the confrontation with the West, just like the USSR.
Thank you to Veronika Malinboim and Yulia Velavik for helping us unpack the Russian cultural code and how it's being used as a vehicle for ideology. If you're still listening, thank you for staying with us from the team. The sound mix for this episode was by Nigel Dix, production by Krista Shaturi, and me, Krasi Ivanova-Twig.